recording?
We are already recording, and I'm trying to turn off the chime for when people join us, but I'm not sure where that is.
Okay. So this session is called Cloud versus On-Premise, Explaining the Pros and the Cons. My name is Jason Wells. I'm a Senior Research Computing Consultant at Bentley University in Waltham, Massachusetts. My job title is so new, if you try and Google me, you won't even see it, so please don't. I also realized in talking with some of you that this is going to be so contentious that I actually had to state my perspective on things. The short version of the slide is Bentley is a very tiny business school. It is a nonprofit, but we do one thing very, very well. We just focus on business. We set up a system back in 2016 using a CRI group and do have internet too, but fundamentally, like, I've got 18 nodes and that's my research computing environment. So it's not a huge environment. I kind of wanted to just show everybody, make sure everyone's on the same page. And so this is Bentley's data center. I got up on a ladder next to the sprinklers just so I can get this perspective and try and show everybody. At one point we had 300 different servers in this room because virtualization is down to about 160 now. But so just to review some of what we're talking about when we say we're moving to the cloud, we've got racks for all the servers. These are the servers themselves. We also have battery backup systems that are fully redundant. There's 2 different systems, so if the power fails for whatever reason, we've got about 30 minutes to get over to the data center and try and turn all the servers off before everything fails. Storage area network that keeps everything, all the storage for the virtual servers up and running. There's a second one of these in another room that's very important in the building. Cooling systems. We are in the process of migrating from an old system to a new system, so there's 4 different systems right now, including the 2 that were put in to handle the old system failing. We have a fire suppression system. This was introduced to me by saying that I needed to leave the I wouldn't be able to breathe. That's not true, but it's the same gas that's in asthma inhalers, but you don't want to breathe a ton of it. Networking, and this is a perennial problem. I say here I really miss Pete because this used to look beautiful, and the guys that came in after Pete really haven't bothered to make it look beautiful. Troubleshooting gets to be a problem at that point. The amount of power that's flowing through our data center is about 26.1 kilowatts. That's quite a bit. And then the type of maintenance that we have to do on the servers. Hard drives fail all the time, and we're constantly very concerned about them failing. So I've got them prepped and ready to go. This is our Hadoop cluster, and it's got a bunch of different type of mount points that we're using for it. So it's a bit of an issue. When we talk about cloud computing and whether or not we want to migrate to it, we have to kind of approach it basically from a perspective of how much it's going to cost us. What we're talking about is all this infrastructure, the energy, the maintenance, such as taking up with my 18 nodes. We're moving all of that to the cloud. I specifically wanted to put in, we may also calculate salaries and license costs, but please don't remove them when you move to the cloud because we need jobs, okay? And our users still need the licenses. For Bentley's 63 servers, that's the whole data center. They computed it out to about 4,500 a server. For my 12 to 18, it depends on how you figure it, it's between 54,000 and 81,000 a year. When we look at how we've got the relationship between the number of servers and the cost per server, I see this very interesting trend that I wanted to point out to everybody. Bentley has 63, and we're spending 4,500, the yellow line, for our servers. When I talk to other schools about how much they're spending, I see a different trend though. We see the number of servers increasing, and we see the cost per server decreasing. And I believe that's something called economies of scale. This is the business side of things. If you wanted to make your own paperclip, it would take a long time. You'd have to be sitting there bending wires, and you'd probably get a box of Band-Aids. Or you could actually pull off Rudolph Grunder's AGs at BK 1500 and make 1,500 of these things a second, or a minute, I think it is. And thus you could sell them much cheaper. And so the idea is we're going to move to the cloud, and we think that the larger shops are going to be able to move to the cloud. And so Bloomberg is saying, put your head in the cloud back in 2011. We've got Cloud Computing Magazine, and they're saying a storm's brewing. The cloud is everywhere. We'll help you navigate and get what you need. Data Center Journal wants to know what is a hybrid cloud and how are companies using it. And then my favorite, Cloud Magazine again, why your IT guy hates the cloud. And so this is an example of the cloud. It looks like Bentley's data center, but on scale. They've done it massively. This is a Microsoft data center. This is an Azure cluster. When we talk about economies of scale, they can actually do some really crazy things. These are inside of shipping containers. They've got a bunch of these that are sitting in the data center. They're talking about sinking them down into the Pacific Oceans and taking heat cooling from there. An example of Amazon's data center, I think this is the back of the servers. And then Google's, which is awfully dark and imposing. I came up with this because what I wanted to do was take Bentley's annual IT budget and then and said, like, well, let's see how it compares if we were able to move everything to the cloud. And so what I literally did was take that budget, divide it by 1 node, 2 nodes, 3 nodes, 4 nodes, 5 nodes, and on and on and on, all the way out to way out here. And you can see there's a crossover point at 65. For Bentley's 63 nodes, it made sense for us to move to the cloud. Anything on this side, it does make sense to move to the cloud. If you're on this side, though, at least financially, it might not make sense. We'll see an example of that in the future. So this is what my 12 servers moving to the cloud looks like. You can see we're a Microsoft shop, so it's all Windows. But I'm using a lot of different scale sets. We're using some elastic capabilities. But the end result is we're doing about 39,107. And I'm coming out at 3,008.30 per server. So we're saving 1,500 per server. The advantages for Bentley is that essentially there's nothing in the Bentley picture that you saw that would be necessary any longer. We wouldn't have to spend any more time worrying about power management. You would not believe how complicated power management is, for us at least. Hard drives, networking, storage, and whatnot. We're rolling out new services very easily. I specifically didn't ask for the 54,000, I asked for 70,000, just so that I could roll out a 128-core machine that one of my researchers really needs. Likewise, we're doing a lot of social media analysis, and so we could roll out a small army of 2-core machines very cheaply and be able to process tweets individually very quickly that way. Disaster recovery is easier, we'd be saving money, and then the CIO, I think, would be pretty happy with me if we're saving money. For disadvantages, and this is a big gotcha, I'm using those scale sets in Elastic to save money. If I'm making assumptions about how much they're going to be used, though, and if they get used more than that, my budget's blown. So while I'm successful with services to my users, the accounting side of the house is going to be pretty angry with me. We've also got no control of technologies below the OS layer and no experience with the technologies below the OS layer. This is part, though, the second one is what really kind of concerns me. When I look at jobs beyond Bentley, you all have descriptions of stuff below the OS layer, like rolling out different network topologies and things of that nature. And so suddenly I start worrying about whether or not I can get jobs beyond Bentley. We also want to be cautious, however. This is not the fullest of the problems here. This was the university that gave me some accounting on their budget. They're using about 1.5 million per year. And so it works out to about 2,266.47 per node. The cheapest I could get them to move to the cloud was this crazy, almost 3 million. Sorry, it's near the bottom here. But they would essentially have to double their budget in order to move to the cloud. And so we can do another one of these crossovers, which I did for them. Crossover is at 344, way over here. They had 660 nodes, way over here. So it probably doesn't make sense. There's got to be some other reason for them to move to the cloud. This is why I just declared my perspectives earlier, because I think there's going to be some disagreement on this. The lessons learned so far that we've got is that Bentley's move works just because our numbers of server is so small and our infrastructure is so expensive. Most places have sprinklers rather than that crazy FM200 fire suppression system that we have. Scale sets are absolutely your friend if you can use it. I suspect a lot of you are oversubscribed with your number of users that are using it, and so that may not work. The 3 so I'm trying to run as much as possible in that mode. And then I really want to point out that we're a small business school, and so your shop will definitely be different. You want to do that crossover trip that I was talking about on your own. Reducing the servers makes the cloud more attractive. That it felt like sort of a got you. If you start reducing servers, the cloud picture looks, you start working your way down that graph, and all of a sudden it looks more and more attractive to go to the cloud. And so I just wanted to caution everybody about that. And then the cloud is really great for R&D and special projects. I told you about those 2 different types servers that we're rolling out. For 20,000, I can roll out that 128 core machine, whereas I could also do a $100,000 MRI grant. Bentley's a small school. We're not going to get the MRI grant. I really wish we would, but I can do the 20,000 now and pretty easily be able to see if it works or not. Yes, Henry.
Can I just make one comment about the MRI thing?
Yeah.
So the NSF actually sets aside PhD granting institutions for the MRI program.
Excellent.
So there are never any guarantees, but I would encourage you to try.
Okay. It's on my radar. I'm definitely going to try it, but we'll see. It's going to be weird too because I'm moving everything to the cloud. So if I'm applying for an MRI grant to get a large server, then what do we do with it? Call it hybrid, I guess.
What's the scale set?
Oh, scale set is like elastic computing. It's the idea that we're going to look at the 6 cores or the 8 cores or however many you've got on your server now, and when you get to a predefined number, like all 8 of them are used, we're going to spin up another instance. So it's just like elastic computing. All right, so we have a panelist, a group of panelists, some of whom are going to falsify everything I've said. Hussein Al-Azam from the University of New Mexico, Aaron Bergstrom from the University of North Dakota, Jason Sims from Lafayette College, and Dan Voss from the University of Miami. I put up a list of topics that we might discuss. You guys are going to drive this and take it however you want, though. So, would any of you like to start with just explaining your experiences so far? Go for it.
So we've been looking at the cloud solutions just like anyone else. And oh, okay. All right. So we've been testing with the cloud solutions for like some time now because like we are separate from central IT. We are the HPC center, and IT is moving to the cloud, and they had a big move because of the CIO's opinions. We started looking at it, and then in our scenario, just as you had with the scales here, if the utilization of our HPC nodes is below 30%, then it makes sense to be on the cloud. It will be much cheaper. But once we go beyond 30% utilization of like the 24/7 hours of the clusters, it doesn't make sense. It will be so expensive. With storage, we are looking at maybe buckets because that might be cheaper. Like, you know, it's very rare when you have to recover most of the time. And so that might make it cheaper.
At UND, you know, we've been asked to. I keep getting asked, you know, how much of what you do can be moved to the cloud. Quite frankly, I haven't done any cost comparison yet on anything that's done, and I don't plan to in the near future. When it comes to the cloud computing stuff, I'm concerned about. The thing that excites me about using the cloud is the flexibility with the resources that I have. So, yeah, we just purchased a new batch of hardware. We're deploying OpenStack on it with a bunch of other data science applications. And we haven't had a chance yet to try those out. But the idea is that we're going to provide clusters as a service to different IT departments on campus for their research activities. So that they can put additional hardware into our private cloud, which we have on premises, and also basically come up with different configurations for what they want to do without having to affect all the other users on campus.
So I was at the University of Kansas for the last 5 years, and I'll tell you what our strategy was. So universities are much different than a lot of places because a lot of them don't have power and cooling in their budget for your HPC centers. So that is a wash of a cost. You don't see it. And so your main costs are data center, which we had a grant for a data center, and then our hardware, which is dirt cheap compared to buying ours at a private cloud company that is looking for a profit too. So we did have special cases, like I talked about earlier. The FedRAMP certification was a big deal because we don't have that on our general user cluster. That's not something we're going to do, and we're not going to certify it for Department of Defense grants. We had 2 other people that also did it for services, your SaaS, service as a, or services.
Cluster as a service.
Not clusters of service, but software as a
service.
service. Or PaaS or SAT, whatever, there's 17 now. But so there is a out of, you guys would have Globus software, Globus Connect.
Yeah.
They also have a genetic site called Globus Genetics, Globus something. And all of their genetic hosting, bioinformatics software was in Amazon Cloud. My researcher also had on-prem cluster and stuff at her workstation. So the goal was to make like a hybrid. She would send some of her jobs to the Amazon Cloud through Globus Genomics, and then come back to her cluster, do some post-processing, and then back to her workstation. And what she found out too was you've got to know where your stuff is in the cloud, because if you leave it on the primary storage, you get a big bill at the end of the month because it's just sitting there on primary storage. So you have to be cognizant of where your data sits. It can't just be, I'm in the cloud, and that's great because they have different tiers of storage. And with compute, they have your cheap 2-core stuff that is meant for some business services. But if you want HPC, newer cores, high-speed interconnect to the back end, you're spending 10 times more than your basic compute. So depending on your researchers and your service, it is vastly different what they need and where they go. University of Nebraska has a nice dashboard that shows how much is spent on their current cluster, and then a running total of even Elastic, how much it costs in Amazon at that moment in time, how many jobs are running. It's roughly about 10 times more, 5 times more than they can do on-prem.
So I'm probably in a little bit different situation than my fellow panelists here. We at Lafayette are just in the midst of trying to understand how to leverage greater on-prem or cloud solutions, because we've been in a process for about a year now of trying to understand how better to centralize some of our research or higher performing computer operations, to provide certain things as a campus service rather than just on a departmental level. So we're right at the cusp of kind of asking these exact questions. You know, is it better for us to be in the cloud? Is it better for us to be on-prem? Should we do some? What I'm struggling with is even looking at some of our service catalog that we're just exploring. So for instance, we're looking at, let's say, Jupyter Hub, for instance. And the problem that I find is that it seems like a lot of our usage patterns for things that might especially extend into the classroom really need this ability, and I know it's such a buzzword, to like burst into the cloud essentially like that, or to be able to leverage elastic computing in effective ways. So if we have a couple of classes with an enrollment of 60, let's say, they might need fairly decent resource. Well, let me rephrase that. For about 90 to 95% of the semester, you might see anywhere between 0 to 4 concurrent sessions of, let's say, Jupyter, you know, running on a system. But say the night before a homework is due or before an exam is due, that might jump up to about 60, you know, concurrent sessions. And the amount of resources needed to support that, it doesn't necessarily justify having either an on-prem or a cloud-based solution that can handle that maximum running at 24/7 availability. So we're trying to think about how we can be smart about using elastic resources or, you know, other emerging technologies like Kubernetes or whatever it might be to try to better support those. But yeah, I mean, I'm right in the midst of this about trying to understand all the economics that are involved, the sort of use patterns that need to emerge. And I haven't come away with many solutions. I'm sort of, you know, kind of wandering in the dark, you know, feeling the different parts of the elephant and trying to describe it to people and putting together all those use cases. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
And the second question, are you mandated to go?
So no, we're not mandated. We are asking these questions. There haven't been any formal decisions, but it is interesting along those lines that when we start to discuss internally about what kinds of things would we like to offer as a campus service and where might these live, I think there is a tendency on many people's parts to say, well, you should really, you know, it would really be best if you did that as a SaaS solution, as a software as a service, or it would really be best to look at cloud solutions, or maybe we should look into Amazon, you know, Elastic. There is almost a knee-jerk reaction against doing stuff on-prem. And so part of what I'd like to do is to understand this goes back to a discussion we had yesterday in terms of metrics, but what are the tools that I have at my disposal, such as the process that you went through to generate those graphs, or just, other people's experiences, or better practices or best practices, as we might say, to understand how to either support or refute that argument for various services. So for some things, it might absolutely make sense to go into the cloud, full on. For other things, no, it absolutely might make sense to have some on-prem metal that we're using. And I don't necessarily know, how to make those arguments either for or against when somebody recommends either doing something on-prem versus the cloud. But there's no sort of general mandate that, I or anyone else has to consider one or the other.
So like it's, as Henry says, it depends. So in some cases they tried to move us to the cloud, and that in general, that push was pushed back and didn't work. But for some like special groups, we had to move them to the cloud. Like it was our advice for them to go. Like one of the cancer research facilities that we worked with on genome sequencing, they had customers who were willing to pay a lot of money for their stuff. So we moved them to the cloud, and they pay about $6,000 a month to Amazon, which is nothing for them, but it was killing our bandwidth with the connection to their users and all of that. So it made sense at that point. With this group, we tested the hybrid cloud with one of the vendors, but it was very new, like it was about in 2014. That failed, and that's when we completely moved to the cloud. So it just depends.
Like I said, the state government is interested in adopting the cloud as much as possible. Although I think that as far as being mandated, the state legislature a couple years ago mandated that all IT be centralized within the state university system, and that's a long-term goal, and they've centralized several things, but research computing has not been one of them. But I've been directed by the CIO to find ways in which, at least in spirit, we can at least attempt to meet that mandate, I guess. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to do the cloud infrastructure, so that we can offer services from a central location, even though maybe the IT departments are providing the direct support.
So I asked my friend at Nebraska, Adam Cabriz, and he sent me the link. So they have a running total of their cores running on the different clusters, plus storage versus hourly price on Amazon EC2. So right now it's at 3.5 million. I don't think that includes HPC compute. It's just straight dashboard stuff. So if you guys have a question about how it's computed, I can ask them too. But like everything else, it depends. Like Henry always says, sometimes case by case, it's better if you have things in Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud. Because there was a panel two weeks ago. Who was at the Verizon Founder for Cloud Vision Thoughts? Henry, you were in the room, weren't you? At the back.
Yeah, I think so.
And there was also a NASA paper that came out a few weeks ago that Jeff Pummel was on the campus champion list. The reason to be on the campus champions list, not a campus champion. And I think their calculation was, ignoring personnel costs, it was still 4 to 7 times more to move something to the cloud, unless they did specialized things like GPU compute, which they did not have on campus. If you have someone who has something GPU, you need great. And then University of Minnesota, same thing. They have the Minnesota MSI Supercomputing Institute, but they don't have something on-prem, which I'm forgetting right now, for bioinformatics. There is FPGA Dragon, and one of the cloud providers has this. It is a FPGA for bioinformatics gene sequence alignment. You don't have it on campus. I think it costs maybe 6 figures to get one. Try it on Amazon or Google or wherever it is, or Azure. Test your workflows, test everything else, and if it works well, I think you're going to buy stuff on-prem, but also a testing platform. It's things that are there for you to try and make it work. You can flip that.
So I think in Bentley's case, our CIO came over from Harvard and basically said, we're going to get rid of the data center. And all the folks in IT basically said, sure, that sounds great, we'll do it. So they started moving the disaster recovery stuff over to the cloud. And Microsoft Azure specifically, they found it to be so slow that they started hiding things in network closets and backup places. And essentially they're trying to resist it and get him on board with understanding that it's probably not a viable option. I'm kind of questioning how things are going to run for me because my users are going to be running their applications directly from the cloud. It's going to be cloud to cloud, at least with me. So I'm not too worried about doing a hybrid solution just yet, unless that MRI sort of grant comes through, and then we'll probably have some real concerns. Okay, so I think we sort of got into what parts of storage, compute, GPU, and R&D with your comment. Do you guys want to talk about?
So if you want to do compute as you do on site with like just CPUs, and you need InfiniBand network, that would be hard because most of the vendors, they don't have InfiniBand, and it would be very limited for you. For example, like one of the biggest clouds, they will tell you it's not even our strategic plan to have any InfiniBand. And they were even willing to pay to compare for IP performance compared to what you get on Ethernet. So what they sell is enhanced Ethernet, which is really just an Ethernet channel that they virtualize the channels with them inside. So like for big HPC problems that go across a lot of nodes, that wouldn't work in my opinion.
So one of my goals is to take all of our virtual machine deployments and move them into the cloud as well. So I have, of the new system, I have 3 nodes that will be dedicated to web services, streaming video, our volunteer computing service, which actually ships out jobs all over the world to thousands of computers, which we get additional 25 teraflops of compute power out. All those web services type of stuff will be inside the new cloud. And then we'll eliminate our Hyper-V infrastructure once that's all migrated over. I'm hoping one of the benefits of that is that if one of those machines goes down, the cloud can immediately just power up one or take one of the compute nodes and ship all that activity over to one of the compute nodes until we can bring one of the VM nodes back on, fix the VM node. Yes.
So a question, and this is from a few minutes ago, but a question from Zoomland. When you talk about centralizing, is that excluding use of the cloud, or could centralize mean having an office that deploys to the cloud? Yeah, sorry, that was 6 minutes ago, so context has drifted a bit.
Can I address that one a little bit?
If you want, sure.
We need a microphone.
Probably not.
He's loud.
I've been watching this in the federal arena as well as, the DoD federal arena, and they're a little bit different. But there is a mandate in the federal arena from an even higher authority, the Office of Management and Budget, who of course is expert in high performance computing, has declared that all HPC resources will be concentrated in a small number of data centers. There's also a move afoot to do the same sort of thing in the Department of Defense, although it's not gaining nearly as much traction. But both the feds and DoD separately do have cloud initiatives ongoing. And they're for separate things. The data center initiatives are primarily designed to concentrate the high performance tasks and the truly big storage that needs to be accessed frequently tasks. The more individual jobs are going out, they're investigating going out into the cloud. And by into the cloud, so far management has decided that this is probably going to be the commercial cloud with some flavor of FedRAMP certification. Yeah, and in the DoD sense, some additional security aspects that need to be employed. So they're sort of the same. You know, we're going to concentrate everything in the cloud in some regards, but there's a little bit of rational thought that goes into it. There has been a large move within NOAA in the last couple of years to say, oh, we're going to try and do all our computing, including our modeling in the cloud. And I want to thank Henry for a rather eloquent discourse on containers yesterday that I'm going to be using very soon in yet another teleconference to try and bring a little bit of rational thought to that process. Does that help it?
I think so.
Obviously not.
Because I think the picture that I'm building is that what's going to happen eventually is that as I ramp up the usage amongst my users, I'm going to blow the budget on those scale sets. We're going to end up driving the usage of the first node usage so high that all of a sudden it's going to be cheaper to actually move to a physical presence. And then what they're going to say is, well, why don't you move it to the Mass Green High Performance Computing Center, which is one of those regional centers where things are being centralized. That way, Bentley doesn't need to have it in their own data center, but at the very least, we can meet the prices that we're seeing in the cloud. I will say that I sent the accounting for that large one that I showed you all to Microsoft and didn't get much of a response for them. They focus a lot on more of the qualitative sides of this, of the cost savings that you're going to have by your staff not having to focus on swapping out hard drives, that they can instead focus on the quality of your cluster install or that nature. So it's a different take on.
Are seeing with the concentration of data centers is access to the hardware. If you have a requirement for fast access, for instance, the group that I work with specifically engages in real-time runs during the severe weather season. If we are running out of one of the data centers, we don't have any guarantee of even a reservation, much less a real-time run. That has posed a problem for us.
So this was brought up in the Birds of the Feather at PERC that during Amazon Prime Day, everyone was kicked off their servers because they had to use them for transactions. So you have no guarantee. And the other thing someone brought up was there's no paper about this, but I think it's John Lott. I don't go on recording and say what it was, but you mentioned that they had gone on-prem to the cloud and just decided to go back on-prem for their service. No one knows why. It was cost whatever, but there is. It's a shifting sands of how you budget and figure out how to do things. Like NIH, a big deal. We had Microsoft this year come to our campus 3 years ago to talk about a whole metagenomics, biology focused how to get more people to do things in the cloud. And so like Google has partnered with NIH for their STRIDES science, technology, research, infrastructure, and discovery. And their big deal is to put a lot of the data sets in the cloud with easy access and tools. And so they're developing tools to do their partnership so that instead of you trying to figure out where all this data is, it's one place in the cloud and have the tools and you can do it. So there are lots of specific things that do fit in the cloud that might have fit on-prem because it's not easy enough for you to do. And it's a moving target.
So the next question we've got is about legal security and compliance concerns. Do any of you have any specific ones? I know with Bentley, it actually looks a bit better for us setting up we've got researchers who are doing HIPAA limited data sets and they're expected to move to HIPAA data sets. Every time I think about that, I think about all the different servers that I need in order to control the security and compliance requirements, and I just don't have servers. So for me, it ends up being a little bit easier from that perspective. Do any of you?
I mean, I won't say too much about that other than to sort of second what you're saying, in as much as we have researchers on campus who have, data sets with PII or HIPAA information. And the steps that that we and they have had to go through to secure those data are, sometimes fairly extreme, including like, locked cabinets with one key that the one researcher has, and physical servers or like a physical portable hard drive that they have to take around because they can't store it on a network. But we've started to see some questions emerge where, particularly with researchers who are collaborating with researchers at other institutions, potentially either across the country or across the world, or even just across town, they need to be able to transfer and store these things in shared ways over a network. And we get a lot of questions like, what service should I use for that? And right now, we don't have a great answer. So, can we store them on Google Drive? Well, who knows? I mean, the University of Michigan came to the conclusion that said, yes, for certain kinds of sensitive data, you can store it on like a team drive or something, and it would be fine. But for other stuff, do we have to consider like a Globus type solution, like, with their HIPAA compliance, or, can we use, who knows, but those kinds of things. We don't have any great answers for those, but we're starting to see these questions more and more, and so we're struggling with them.
So we had similar issues with like medical fields and clinics, and I think there are smaller vendors. Yes.
No, go ahead. I've got a question to follow this question, so when you guys are done.
So we have smaller vendors who would cover like specific problems, like PHI data or something like that. The government has, I think they work now with Amazon with AWS for cloud or something like that. So that should be compliant too. But sometimes the problem is the cloud service provider wouldn't give you a written paper that says we comply. They would tell you, yeah, we meet all of these conditions, but we cannot guarantee you the data safety and something like that. So which would cost you in a case of like an audit or data loss.
So I know a couple of things when it comes to access to data. Our several researchers brought up the fact that they'd be worried that they wouldn't be able to get their data out of the cloud because it would cost too much. I know when the hubs negotiated with Microsoft about setting up research credits, they got a guarantee that any data that was in there would be downloadable from the cloud without any additional cost. Beyond that, I know I have a project that's at UND that's got several terabytes of archival quality video for the last, since 1972, there's been a conference at UND, a writers conference, lots of big name authors, all of whom have publishers that are very concerned about that content being stored anywhere else besides on the UND campus. So in that case, we couldn't move that stuff to the cloud even if we wanted to, because we would violate probably like 20 different agreements with publishers who have big wallets and like to sue people. So, not everything, just for that reason alone, not everything can go to the cloud.
So back before the cloud services were FedRAMP certified, I went through the process with the lawyers and the compliance officers. And years ago, the trick was you made a VPC, a virtual private cloud, that just extended your network from your university to the cloud instances. That was what our medical school did to make sure that it looked like it was your own internal network, doing the monitoring, trafficking, and everything else to be the compliance officers. Suite of monitoring tools. Now, with FedRAMP certification, they will certify it, but once again, it's based on your end users who do dumb things and still let the data get out there. They still have to sign their IRBs and their guarantees when they get the research dollars or their grants to say, I will make sure I don't, or my grad students don't share this. You can't stop stupid. But they, on their end, will say, yes, their data centers are secure and network and everything else. But that's still up to you, the end user, who can still do things that let your stuff get out there, which still makes your university liable. So you still have to have, I think this is a big deal everywhere, is that wherever you do the computing, you still need the personnel and the people power to help people do things. This is why there's ACIRF and all these different things now, because you can't just blindly give them things they go, because how many of them come to these, let's learn how to do this and what we do. It's not as easy as Henrik says, pushing your button your phone. This is still very important to have people around, no matter where you are, to help do the research and get these next steps out.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the state realizes is that people are the largest cost. That by moving into the cloud, they can somehow eliminate that cost. What they don't realize is that's not the only thing you're eliminating is the hardware. It's not the people, because without the people, you can't get anything running reasonably quickly. I mean, yeah, in my mind, it's so basic, it's almost difficult to explain.
Okay, comments and questions from TV Land. One is the commercial cloud costs typically don't include software installation, setup, support, and data transfer. Those are additional costs, many of which still have to be borne internally by the institution. We were just talking about how do you calculate the cost of doing it on premise versus the cost of the cloud. It should be as fair a comparison as possible, and that includes you have to figure out what fraction of the team's time is being spent doing things that are not system facing. Any portion of time that's being spent user facing, you're still going to have to be paying for that. Okay, and then the question was, what does the panel think about Cray on Azure? By the way, I should clarify, because we're a state institution, none of us can endorse or disparage any product, service, or firm. So I'm going to go broader than that. So note that this is not an HPC metal in public cloud data center, but HPC resources in your own data center centrally managed by Azure. So what about central management of resources that are on-prem but are managed by a third party, for example, a private company?
I don't know anything about it, so I can't really comment on it, other than the fact that it sounds a little bit better than shipping it all off to Amazon, or Azure. But I'd have to see the details to really have any kind of opinion.
I've never heard of it either until right now.
So I know about Coast University that they did something like that with Cray, and it gets so expensive. So if your budget is unlimited, then yeah, you do it. It would be a great service, I think, but it's so expensive.
So Coust is sort of a special example because when we became involved with Coust, when I was at Texas A&M, the funding was effectively unlimited.
Exactly, yeah.
But they're not the only group that is undertaken to have somebody like Cray manage their infrastructure. And NOAA does exactly the same thing with their HPC environment at the National Centers for Environmental Prediction. They have IBM manage all of their actual NOAA personnel that lay hands on metal. That's led to some interesting problems. When NOAA this is my perception, but I've had it verified to some extent by some of my colleagues up there. When NOAA went with Cray infrastructure several years ago, the IBM personnel claimed they didn't know enough about it to manage it effectively, and the last acquisition went back to pizza boxes because IBM knew how to manage pizza boxes, didn't know how to manage Cray. And integrating Cray into the infrastructure that existed was very difficult. I'm a little concerned when you have outside people that you're going to see that. By the same token, I suspect the Microsoft world and Azure is going to make sure that their personnel have adequate training from Cray and adequate hands-on because they're too big and too professional to do it otherwise.
Well, just from listening to that, I think that makes it probably much more affordable at scale at large institutions than it would be at smaller schools. So I love it. I love getting presented great ideas that work well for people with lots of money or really large, or have really large expenditures, only to find out going to cost me an arm and a leg more at my scale than it would a larger institution.
The next one, I was sort of curious if anyone had any success stories. I might be the only person in the room that does. We did move 2 researchers out to the cloud, so they've got 2 different servers. They're spending about $145 a month, and so you multiply it out, and it looks like a bargain. What I like to point out to IT is the cost, if you average it out over the 5 years that we would normally have the server, it's almost break even. So like, the question is always there, is it really in the manager or isn't it? Does anyone in the room, or you guys, or anyone really, have another type of success story?
Yeah, so we had a faculty working on bioinformatics, and they were actually teaching workshops and doing collaborations across many universities. There wasn't a central IT that they could go to. And so he trained all of his, that made it possible to do their research. We could have gone to maybe Exceed at some point, but it was much easier for cloud. And the free Amazon resources at the time were worthwhile and helped them get going. It was really nice because people from any institution, didn't matter what resources they had, could get up the same environment. And so from an education and a collaboration point of view, it was very successful.
Yeah, so that training piece is great. I've done that for many different workshops now. So data carpentry, we use AWS. I guess I assume software carpentry too.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, Intel came and gave a workshop on who is our partner out of California. So yeah, all in AWS, and then at supercomputing tutorials for OpenHPC and another workshop, simple AWS, where you just log in and go, and it's not an endorsement of the Amazon Web Services, but it's simple, easy, spin up, spin down, and there you go. And like you said, trying to spin it up on your local resource to get around your jobs and your people that paid for or want to burn for the research is harder, but that's always a big deal in training and education. Sometimes that's the easiest thing because you're bursting. You log in, do a bunch of stuff, log out, you're done. So it doesn't cost much money unless it's free. And usually these training sessions are free, and it's simple. So that bursty stuff is a big deal. But if you bursty for HPC when you have like 10,000 cores, you're going to burst because you're out of 10,000 cores. That's going to be a big bill, and it's hard to budget for that bill. And then the data storage, and then where does it go? And that's the big problem. And it's not an easy answer, especially in places that have usually fixed budgets or one-time costs. Sometimes universities get a one-time buy, and that's it for that budget year. And how do you get that money to budget that every month to pay your cloud bill?
Researcher on campus who was part of a research training project called Dwarf in a Box, and that went well on Amazon. Quite frankly, part of our last MRI proposal was allow her to deploy it on the proposed cloud infrastructure, because in the end, they don't want to pay for that cost of deploying that system or the Dwarf in a Box on Amazon long term. So, I mean, I don't expect that would be a huge cost every year. If you don't have to pay it, well, if we have local infrastructure for it, she would have rather hosted it at our institution.
So we had also a neuroscience group that we found some wrong things that were going on, like violations. And what we did is we moved them to a nonprofit neuroscience repo kind of thing that you just VPN to remove your data. And because of the small amounts of data that was being generated, it was much more feasible and made more sense for all of them.
So if we'll move on to the non-AWS Azure resources, since this has been an ad for them. Jetstream, Science Gateways, anything else?
So, you know, as I said, we're just getting into looking at all kinds of things, and I have a couple of points on this. I am a campus champion, but I haven't been able to, and I've had that role for about the last year, but only once or twice have I carved off a little bit of my time to let some researchers kind of explore the Exceed resources that we have available. But we are thinking about moving, you know, to make larger requests from like Jetstream, for instance, for some VMs and whatnot. But I know in talking with faculty and researchers, and I think it's just a matter that, you know, I don't necessarily have the resources to explain to them well enough. I'm not well versed enough in kind of that process. Some of them are uncomfortable with it because they look at it like, well, so you're telling me I have to write a proposal to use these resources. And I know that the proposal isn't a huge lift. It's not quite like an NSF, you know, full proposal or whatever, but they still think of it as yet another proposal that I have to write. And in some cases, the resources may not even be immediately available. So you might be requesting for some future time, for some future quarter down the road, and they might want it right then. They want those resources immediately available to them. Or they might come back and say something like, well, that's great if I do an educational request and that might get me through this semester, but then I have to re-up it, and I don't want to have to go through that. I just want something that's kind of here and permanent, and I don't have to really think about it much anymore. So there are some, I think, both genuine concerns as well as some that may be more or less unfounded that we're having to get across on our campus to try to make people comfortable with those types of things. We've also used, in addition to kind of thinking about exceed resources, we're definitely interested in science gateways. That's something I'd like to pursue. But even beyond that, we've seen some, so for testing purposes, for pilot purposes, we're running one thing, for instance, on a little DigitalOcean VM, because that was quick and dirty to just spin up a DigitalOcean VM, you know, slap some services on there, let the faculty who are teaching courses leverage that for 1 or 2 semesters. And then we can look at the usage, we can look at the load, we can look at, you know, performance and whatnot, and that will help inform us on what type of system we might need, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on-prem, in a more permanent solution. So that's kind of expensive when you know, get a little VM for that time, but it's kind of worth it for us because it's really low, you know, barrier for entry. I mean, we just spun up a DigitalOcean VM and got our services running in about 2 minutes. And I was like, there it is, have fun. And it's given us some really good data to think about. So I think that there are definite applications for this, and we're exploring them. And you know, certainly I have more questions than answers, but I'm particularly struggling with how to integrate Exceed and more into our workflows. But that's, you know, that's something I'm working towards.
So about this point with Exceed resources, it was helpful for like a small number of our PIs, and I think is to filter like the demand on that like resource, because at the end it's very limited resources, as big as it is, because of like the hundreds or thousands of people who want to jump on it. So like we had 6 or 7 PIs that we tried to get them on Exceed resources through the Campus Champion application that we have. Only 2 of them, like they really did their job and they started running and testing, and then they proved that they applied for a startup, and from there they got grants on Exceed. So it helps a lot. So that's my point.
So the project where we have the conferences recorded for like the last 40 years, you know, we have the requirement that we keep all that data stored on campus, but we were looking at making an interface that we could maybe deploy to Jetstream. But to be honest, I haven't had enough time myself to really explore Jetstream that much, and we ended up just to get stuff up and running, deploying that service on our citizen science grid, volunteer computing infrastructure. That said, I've been in contact with the Jetstream folks, and they have offered to help us set up they've been supportive of us having our own private cloud, and have offered to provide us with advice on how to do that. So whether or not I'm actually running anything on Jetstream, I do appreciate the fact that they have some insight on how to deploy OpenStack services. They're willing to share that and actually feel like it might be advantageous for other people who actually have private.
I'm going to mention something. So Eric Dubins from University of Florida, talking about the cloud, he said it's very hard to compare apples to apples because I think he said the storage in the cloud has like 13 nines of availability, which means 99.9999999. Like compared to our Luster, which is like a couple nines, maybe less, because it's cheaper, faster, and a parallel file system. It's like it's really hard just to have one number to compare your on-prem to the cloud. And then say when we haven't even talked about virtual machines. They're all virtual machines, which means you don't get that bare metal speed. This is the whole point of the virtual clusters for Comet when they deployed it in San Diego, was that they had tried to get bare metal speed out of their virtual machine, and the cloud systems don't care as much. That's not their goal here. That's not their focus. Or the InfiniBand backend. You won't find InfiniBand backend in any systems. If you do, once again, it's going to be 20, 30, 40% slower with a virtual machine environment going over their stuff, and you don't know where your instances are deployed. You're going to pay more money to have it localized to a rack versus data center versus other things that cost more money. That was one thing I wanted to mention before that it's very hard to get that one number to compare, because he said he could do it so much cheaper at his scale and at academic research things. As Henry says, where enterprise is your 5 nines, but research computing is your cutting edge. It can break, and that's speed. Because when you go fast, sometimes you fall out and break. And that was we're talking about Jetstream Science Gateways. Yes, Campus Champions. Give them your hours. If you don't have enough hours, here's a trick. Turn the recording off, Henry. Shh. Don't tell anyone. Add more Campus Champions. You get more hours. It's magic. It's really easy. 1-to-1. That's what I was doing. Henry wants 10 now. That's the case. He has 10 more Campus Champion free hours. Shh. Don't tell anyone on the webs. Applications. They're super short, super easy, and they don't care about the science. I didn't say that either. Science matters. Science is very, very important. No, they wanted to make sure that what you're going to run on Exceed works on their environment and can scale. That's it. Like I had a guy write all the science up, but he said he didn't say how it fit into the core hours on this machine. That's what their reviewers want to see, just how it fits into the environment. So don't scare them off. If they're researchers, they're just writing. Right? So these are like a couple pages. And the Jetstream and Science Gateways and virtual clusters in San Diego do also very cool stuff. And I'll give a shout out to Eric Coulter, who's with the Exceed Resource Integration Group. Campus Resource Integration. He has a virtual cluster talk meeting for Exceed back in, I think, April on Jetstream. And like Science Gateways too is you want this easy button for people, drop a web interface, go somewhere in the back end, launch them on whatever you want. You can get your researchers to do something, that's great. Make them more successful.
Not to plug in for anybody, but Eric Coulter is also the person that got the 2 clusters up and running at Anyway. I don't know what order to do the next 2 and other lessons learned, and is there an all-inclusive method for the math? We've all hedged around how to do the math. I'm not sure if it makes sense to have a larger discussion about that. I'll leave it up to you all. The other lessons learned, we can just talk about anything that we might have missed. We can also take questions and try and do answers from the group here to help.
So about SDSC, they also have many publications about comparing their environment to like private or enterprise cloud to their cloud services that they have.
Can you speak up?
Yeah. So SDSC, they made public publications that are available on their website, and you can look and compare the performance of somebody like Amazon compared to a lot. Like it doesn't go through pricing or these, so it's like more like an academic research that they did, with benchmarking and all of this. And I love it. I always go and check it.
This is a couple of minutes ago. Oh, this is 10 minutes ago. So it's totally off topic, but what the heck. So budgeting for cloud can be challenging, not just for internal funds, but also grant funding. Granting organizations love it when you buy stuff and own it, building infrastructure, but are less pleased when you spend it on services. And I'll add my own comment to that. One way they punish you for buying services rather than permanent equipment is by charging indirect on services on anything that isn't either that isn't either permanent equipment valued above $5,000 or participant support funds for events like this. Everything else is subject to indirect costs. And while there have been discussions about eliminating indirect, and of course your local person your local administrator is welcome to forego indirect on anything they like. Vanishingly few will if they can collect the indirect.
I mean, what is indirect?
Oh, sorry, indirect costs, when you get grant funding, and this is often true with contracts as well, there is an overhead charge, so it's sometimes called facilities and administration. In industry, they sometimes use the term over. Negotiated with the federal government.
Yeah, FNA, Facilities Administration, power lights, cooling, keep the building open. And on that note, I used this years ago. University of Washington, I think like 5 years ago, has a big article saying we're removing FNA for any services that are compute, storage, cloud, whatever related. You're buying a service, great. We want to charge you because we want to be competitive, local versus cloud versus storage, whatever. I'm going to get this totally wrong. I believe that SCIO or someone from University of Washington went to Michigan, trying to do the same thing. Michigan's a gigantic R1, hundreds of billions of dollars and everything, and they said no there. They wouldn't give her their direct on their services for cloud and computing. So yeah, it is very university dependent. And I know there's a couple places that do that because you don't want to charge people a tax going out somewhere else and doing stuff. And I wanted one more plug. Henry had an email he gave last year. He listed top 10 to 15 cloud-ish providers and services.
Well, those providers of genuine tightly coupled HPC, so cloud providers that have a low latency interconnect.
Yes, and so there are places out there that we keep talking about big cloud services that don't care about HPC or interconnects. There are some that do, that are smaller, and there's a list. You also have, I think, generic apple to orange pricing-ish comparison that you're getting.
Yeah,
And
I can give you round figures.
the round figures are still 5 to 10 times
For
more.
tightly coupled, low latency HPC, yeah, it's a factor of 5 to 10 difference per core hour.
And how much was that total cost of ownership?
Yeah, that's all in cost, excluding labor that is not system facing.
Okay, even system facing labor included that one.
It includes system facing labor, the building, power, cooling, network, the whole deal.
So for my curiosity, I assume power here in Oklahoma is pretty cheap. What do you guys?
Yeah, I think we're paying on the order of 8 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour, so it compares favorably to power costs on the coasts.
Coast are like 20 plus, and I think
Yeah,
Hawaii it's 30 plus.
that wouldn't surprise me. I don't know the actual
No,
numbers.
she just said it last week. The first thing. It was 30 something per kilowatt hour.
So to comment on that, the F&A part of charging for indirects on cloud services, I was at the PI meeting for the big data hubs in June, and they had representatives from Microsoft, Google, and Amazon there giving presentations on their successes and research, and some discussion about making these services available to the universities and the F&A charge. I don't know if this was helpful or not helpful to people, but I basically said to them, it's like, look, not every university is going to agree to not charge F&A. And so, if that's really something that NSF is going to explore, I assume they are because they invited you here, maybe those services should just be offered through Exceed. So if you wanted to get access to that Azure, you submit an Exceed proposal like you would for any other asset that Exceed has access to. Like you don't get charged, money to use Exceed, wouldn't have to charge for F&A. Go ahead.
Another comment from Zoomland. At University of California, San Diego, costs associated with cloud and shared computing services are now exempt from indirect cost recovery as an incentive for researchers to use cloud instead of buying more physical equipment.
So does anyone else have any questions or things that we can answer for you all? I know there's a question about the skill sets earlier. Are there any other questions that we can answer? I suspect what I'm actually doing with the last one is volunteering to try and do it on my own. But we touch on so many different models of computing. I know with Bentley, it's probably the easiest one because we're not doing any chargebacks. Everything is purchased by the institution, and so I don't need to worry about any of those types of questions. Has anyone seen any sort of an all-inclusive study for moving to the cloud that would cover all of our institutions as opposed to just the large ones and small ones? Okay, I volunteer.
Yeah, I don't know how you could have an all-inclusive one. I mean, our North Dakota energy costs are so much different. Our staff costs would be different if we have staff. I wouldn't even approach doing the math on anything until I have a decent number of staff, which we could then evaluate the cost. You know, whether I push stuff into the cloud or I have hardware premises, that's going to hardware on premises. That's going to be, you know, lesser. Well, I guess it could astronomically increase if we chucked everything in the cloud. But I still need those people. Until I have those people, why am I even doing an analysis on whether it makes sense to go to the cloud?
So this is how my mind works. I keep randomly remembering things they said in the versus center. Thanks, Eric. So another thing they said is when you have on-premise supercomputing centers, that attracts a lot of faculty and researchers and students too. It's not just, hey, come here and do my stuff there. It's we have a supercomputing center and we are elite. We are better than your other university or institution you're interviewing at. Come here because we will we'll help you be better and beat everyone else. Because if you have cloud access to whatever, we will tailor our stuff to you to make you better. And I still like the idea of, I mean, so someone else in that room said, clouds have service layers and the SaaS thing that you can go here for this thing. And the thing that struck me too is that I would say we'll go there for the Dragon FPGAs for now because easy access here and now. We can pay short term and see, but there's a fit for it. It's just a matter of last year Henry Supercomputing Symposium. Someone from HPE came here. Not HPE, was HPE?
Might have been.
And he said everything will be in the cloud in the next 2 years. And it's weird. And then Dan Stanzione got up after that from Tech, and he's like, but if you look back, there are so many things in the cloud. Now you have your email in the cloud and your Dropbox and things. It's like that covers the large percent of things that can move there, but your HPC and things these are dedicated research, specialized resources. They're different. They're different. The cloud has hit those big things. What would happen, right? Why are we arguing to move everything? That there are always pieces of the cake that can be spread out along different things. Is that the gist? What I remember?
That sounds basically right, yeah.
Way up.
You know, I find myself in, yet again, a slightly different situation than some of my fellow panelists. In terms of research and high-performance computing, certainly anything that would be considered a campus-wide service or resource, we don't actually have a lot that meets that. We have some departmental stuff, we have some equipment and servers that are part of specific labs, but we don't necessarily have a lot that's sort of campus-wide. And so I'm in this position where if I'm thinking ahead as to what our campus service ecosystem might look like, unlike a lot of other people, I can't do the math to come up with my current kilowatt hours and cost per core per hour and all this kind of stuff. So I'm having to try to predict what it will be, which is challenging. Like, will it be cheaper for us to do this in on-prem metal, or will it be cheaper for us to do this in the cloud? And so it's a guessing game for both sides of that equation for me right now, and that's a real challenge. But the interesting thing is when I hear people, even just today, when we're talking about, well, we did our own internal cost comparison, and or there's this report from San Diego or from wherever it might be. I've never heard anything say that the costs could be like 0.8 or 0.9 or 0.75. Everything seems to be higher for the most part when moving to cloud at any sort of scale, which I think is what your graphs kind of demonstrated that as well. And so I would look for what would be useful to me personally, this is a very selfish kind of request. It would be nice to see some sort of formalized meta report that kind of brings together all of these individual local ones, because my situation is not going to mirror, you know, OU's. It's not going to mirror UCSD. It's not going to mirror New Mexico. It's not going to mirror anybody's, because we all have unique needs. But it would be nice to see on the aggregate, regardless of where you're looking, you know, even in a broad range, like costs are 3 to 7 times more expensive, or 3 to 10, or whatever, but they're never going to be less. Like, that would be really helpful for me to have something like that, that when I'm justifying the need, for instance, to purchase on-prem metal, that I can say, well, this isn't just my opinion. In terms of people looking at this, there's fairly good consensus that it would be more expensive for us to, you know, even start with some of this stuff in the cloud. So I know that that's not a real answer. It's kind of a plea, but any feedback on that would be great.
A comment to that also is that at least the reports I've seen do not compare apples to apples. So you start with analysis on your own data center, you go cloud, and then you add all these features you wish you had, and it doesn't really compare because you're adding now redundancy, you're adding now other services. So it's, I also would like to see an apples to apples comparison.
So what do we do? I mean, is that even possible? Like, so it's like a pipe dream, right? It's like we all are asking these questions.
Well, in a way, we're talking about 2 different questions, so let me try and split them out. It is a pipe dream to get an overall picture for the national whatever. And the reason I say that, drive that and endlessly pester everybody to provide the data, it simply won't happen. No one will magically provide that data for no good reason. And by the way, I'm lying. Like on the I'll do it again. On the campus champions list, we have discussions like this, and people, a subset of people provide their data, usually not a big subset. Similarly, for the Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation, there was recently a question about how do you handle who gets how much resources on your cluster, because these tend to be fixed size things. And of the 85-ish members, I think 27 responded or something like that. It's not a huge number, but it was enough to start to get a feel of how this is playing out nationally. So I don't have any optimism that unless, okay, let me say that differently. Whoever complains is in charge. If you are willing to take responsibility for chasing the rest of us to give us your data, there is a possibility that we will get enough data to have something useful. If you do not take responsibility for doing that, I can at least approximately promise no one else will.
But
so if it's important,
yeah,
you have to decide to do it.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying in that sense is, you know, but would it be fair to say that even though we don't have all those data, can you reasonably predict that no matter whom you ask, you're not going to see significant cost savings at scale for going into the cloud?
I don't think we can do that, because if there were, for example, a price war among the cloud providers, that could drive the dollar figures down so much that at least for some period of time, it would be cheaper.
Right.
And that is certainly a possibility given how much money is at stake. So I would not want to go out on a limb. Now, but I also want to address the question that Israel brought up, which now I'm blanking on. Oh, the apples to apples comparison issue. So you can't do an apples to apples comparison issue. I agree with that. What you can do is you can say, here's the minimum capabilities that we need, and therefore whatever we're looking at in the cloud, we need the version of that that has the minimum capabilities. I think what many of us can agree, we have to have a low latency interconnect. That's not true for everybody, but that's true for a substantial fraction of the institutions in question. So if you're looking at the majors, so here I'm thinking of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. There are others, IBM is another one, and I haven't looked at what their stuff is because I haven't had luck finding it on the web, but at least for those three, only Microsoft provides a low latency interconnect. And that low latency interconnect, the version that they have, has way more RAM per server than we would need at OU. However, they do not offer an option to have less RAM. So while it is not an apples to apples comparison, it is what the cost of business would be. Whether you're getting 2 gig per core, which is what we like here, or 16 gig per core, which is what some of the bioscientists want, if people can't get their work done, then that doesn't matter. So you take whatever the cheapest thing that meets your criteria is. That's the closest you're ever going to get to apples. And in that basis, For us at OU, based on our calculations, it's roughly 7.75 times as expensive. So 775% as expensive to do it there as to do it on premise.
So back to the birds of feather. I would pull the people who were there, but the per 18 schedule is no longer available online. I don't know why. So CASC. Are you guys a member of the CASC?
We're not a member of
All right,
that.
so write a check today for $4,000.
I'll get right on that, sure.
And the whole point of this was they started a working group, and as Henry said, 27 had submitted, someone was putting a spreadsheet together with all these costs in it, and to break it down, and I showed that, I have a picture of it, and so if you're part of CASC, you're allowed to join the working group. So that would be, that is a big driver of it. They have a lot of people that have, this is a smaller group, I guess are more receptive to sharing information. But it's only internal CASC. Someone asked the audience, can we join your email list? And they said $4,000.
Yeah. They are a membership organization and they can't do their job if they're not getting the money.
Yes.
So about the service and the cloud and the price war, you can see this more in storage. Like the storage vendors, most of them are so afraid they are losing business. They are not even making money on their hardware. Like when you buy all of these enterprise storage on site, it's like they're losing money on it. They make money on the service. So the support contract that you sign up for them for like 3 or 5 years, that's where they make money on. And I think that is moving to the cloud much faster than compute. And the reason is the market share for HPC with like high speed, low latency interconnects is it's very limited. And the vendors are not seeing the need yet to build such systems. So that, my opinion, that will take time. But for storage wise, it's much cheaper these days. For us, for our center, we are considering backup or DR to the cloud, which would be a much smaller amount of like our data, so it won't be everything. So like if you have 2 petabyte system, then you will end up backing up only a few terabytes, and then everything else, it's like it can be reproduced.
All right, back to how my brain works. So random thoughts. University of Utah. Who has Google Cloud Platform on the university or Google Cloud for Education? Most of you, I'm sure most of you, they'll sign up everyone. They gave you unlimited storage in the cloud, and Utah had a new science DMZ and a 100 gig pipe to Google. They're like, let's try it out. And so they broke Google a couple of years ago. They have a paper on it. And they were double as much as they could from their giant multi-petabyte storage system. And I heard someone at, had to be Stanford. Stanford did the same thing. They decided to do DR to Google Cloud for their entire multi-petabyte HPC storage system. And then 6 months ago, Google said, this is weird. They didn't tell anyone, but they put a 750 gigabyte per day limit to get your stuff to Google Cloud. And no one told anyone. They're like, everything broke. Didn't break. You guys were overusing their system. So yeah, that was a good way to do disaster recovery until someone noticed you were doing it and stopped you.
That's interesting because as I understand this is just a side comment to that. I mean, as I understand the Google Cloud for Education, right? They do provide unlimited storage more or less for users, and as I understood it, there's a 1 terabyte limit per file. So if they limit you to 750 gigs a day, you couldn't even hit that file if you're transferring it up and down. So I mean, that's a very hypothetical, but it's just an interesting thought.
Okay, now I can mention the thing that Azure told me, and I didn't listen to guys about breaking things. Azure told me that their Generation 2 data lake, the speed of it, the network bandwidth, is limited to the speed of the processor and the server receiving. It has nothing to do with the speed of the network connections. I have no idea how they would actually pull that off on the hardware level, but that's what they told me. So if anyone wants to try and break that, please do so.
Okay, people in TV land can't see the face I'm making in response to that statement. But just RAM itself is 800 gigabits per second. So, sorry, now it's double that. So 1600 gigabits, 1.6 terabits per second. Actually faster than that. I am deeply skeptical that any cloud vendor is providing a multi-terabit network between its servers.
Exactly.
So I think in a way that they meant X and you heard Y.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Because I did drill him on it and he maintained it, but I'm not sure if he was up to date on that.
Was that the engineer?
It was an engineer, but it was a sales engineer. So.
The title.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah, well, it varies by company, but sales engineer, let's say, often biases more toward the first word than the second.
Yes.
It's like director of research computing. You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I don't do research computing, I don't direct anything. But other than that,
Expert.
Okay, on that note, is there any other questions or topics that people are curious about? Anything in TV land?
I'm curious about Google Education Plus storage. Does that mean each student can just make another file and put a terabyte there? Or is it not for the student or the user?
Yeah, so if your university has Google Cloud for Education, they have unlimited supposedly storage, but maximum bandwidth of 750 gigs per endpoint. And I don't know about the size limits, but I'm sure there's a whole bunch of limits that I'm telling you about. Like a thing, people figured out the day it stopped working for the Google Cloud, and there's a whole thing on Reddit about like, did you see something? I asked Google, they didn't know about it, but they kept doing tests and hit 750 and stopped. So very, moving target of how we can do things. But yes, unlimited means unlimited just might have throttles. They're more on one side you put it into.
Like your cell phone, it's like unlimited data with your cell phone.
Yes, they just might drop to 3G, 2G,
That's
and
right.
1G with your same thing.
Going once, going twice, going three times, okay. Henry, coming to you, I guess.
right, we are on break. So come back in half an hour, come back at half past the hour, wherever you are. Unless you're in Newfoundland, then come back on the hour. And we'll see you then.